PhD students in association with national universities, because in France only national universities can deliver the PhD diploma. And those students are supervised by almost more than 100 professors and a little bit more than 700 associate professors. Among these 37 research units, almost 50% are actually mixed research units. They are under the authority of the Ministry of Culture and the National Center for Scientific Research, called the CNRS. Those units are multidisciplinary. They deal with, of course, a lot of disciplines that are listed on the slides, and they have also multi-scaled approaches in their research activities. One important document for architecture was published by the Ministry of Culture in 2015. It's called the National Strategy for Architecture. And its main purpose is to change the relationship the French society and the French citizens have with or towards architecture, and to succeed to bring ordinary excellence in our daily spaces and environments. So we are considering that excellence should be everywhere in our daily environment. And in this strategy, some measures are organized and concern all levels and sectors of the disciplines: education, research, the professional practitioners, and what is the most important, the links between those three sectors. This strategy is going to be evaluated next year, and we will adapt it to new tasks and reconsider it for the next five years. In this strategy, there are three major axes that are defined, and those axes are containing specific measures, but I will not explain in detail the measures because it will take too much time. So the six main axes are to develop the general public and the construction public or private sector stakeholders' sensibility and knowledge of architecture. So we consider architecture is not only a question of knowledge and academic knowledge, but it's also a question of sensibility, and it concerns every part of the society. Second axe is to integrate the 20th and 21st century's architectural heritage and develop the architectural interventions of architects in order to enhance and transform the existing built-up environment. The third axe is to articulate education, research, and professions, as I told you before, the links between those three sectors of activities, and to bridge the professional spheres of architecture, of construction, and of the living environment that are sometimes too separated. The fourth one is to identify and mobilize the architectural skills. The fifth one is to recognize the economic value of architecture and to support the professional mutations. And for this theme, the mutations of the professional activities, of course, education and research are fundamental. And the last one is to support experimental agenda and its cultural values regarding the too heavy burden of regulations, sometimes in the construction and architecture domain. In parallel to this national strategy for architecture, 2 years ago, the Ministry of Culture also published another frame to encourage the heritage concerns, architectural concerns, and regarding every times can be traditional heritage or contemporary heritage. So it's a multi-year strategy. And one of the important measures in this document was to ask the National Graduate School of Architecture to implement a mandatory teaching course dealing with theory as well as practice in each of them. And I would like to quote an inventory that has been made of these existing courses by Mr. Kremitzer, who is here today, and his colleague Mr. Balducci. This inventory was ordered by the PUCA, the Urbanism, Construction and Architecture Plan, which is another national research agency depending on the Ministry of Ecology, and that this book has been published in 2018, so we can have a clear now vision of what is teaching and where and how about architecture heritage in our architecture schools. In a larger way, the Service of Architecture responded to a recommendation of the European Council that was edicted in 1991, and the Service of Architecture created a special label in 1999, so we are celebrating the 20th birthday anniversary of this label. So this label is called, was called 20th Century Heritage, to recognize the quality and the value of the 20th century architecture buildings. And this label was in service until 2001 and replaced recently by another one in the continuity, which is now called the Contemporary Remarkable Architecture, no, the Remarkable Contemporary Architecture label, to solve a problem that 3,000 buildings were having this previous label in the inventory in 2016, but 50% were protected as historical monuments. That there was a kind of confusion of what we were dealing with this 20th century heritage label and the law for historical monuments. So there was a kind of heterogeneous situation on the territory regarding this label. So the new label was created especially for buildings that are less than 100 years ago and that are not protected by the historical monument regulations. To get this label, there are 5 criteria. First one is the singularity of these buildings, those buildings. The second one is a building that can that proved a level of innovation when they were built, when they were designed and built. Those buildings must be famous through renowned publications. They also must be a response to a public policy coming from the Ministry of Culture or another ministry. And they should also correspond to approved architectural movements or school of thinking about architecture. So regarding all these orientations and frames that have been created by the Ministry of Culture, our research bureau decided to launch a research program, 5 years incentive research program towards the graduate schools of architecture. This program, if I translate it in English, is called 20th Century Architecture, Material for Project for Sustainable 21st Century Sustainable City. So it's organized in partnership with the Ministry of Ecology, the Ministry of Culture, and the research agency I mentioned before, the Urban Renovation Agency, dealing with the transformation of this 20th century heritage, and two major public social housing actors in France. So from 2016 we launched 3 calls for proposals and selected 13 research teams that are multidisciplinary, and we finance the projects. And we are now preparing a 4th call for proposals that will be more centered on experimentation of what this about with using what those 13 research teams have produced and test their research products. So the teams, it was mandatory, must have partnerships, like local partners, can be a city or region, can be a public social housing actor. It can be a public or private owners of the buildings they are studying. It can be also inhabitants associations, because the specificity of these 20th century heritage buildings is that those buildings are inhabited, they are not vacant. And also they could have as partners some architecture offices to link the research with the professional skills. So briefly what we are asking to those research teams dealing with 20th century architecture heritage, we are asking them several questions. I will just mention the most important ones. So one of the main purposes we ask them to develop is to make research on how to recognize the values of 20th century buildings and their open space. Which are the values, for who, how, what kind of methodology they propose to explore, investigate those values. Those values can be architectural, economic, social, etc., historical, of course. And the result is to bring or create knowledge using about those buildings, using archives. They have to make databases, etc. We lack that kind of information, or we have those information, but they are not organized in a proper way. A second important purpose we have towards those research teams is to evaluate the capacity of those buildings and their potentials to be transformed regarding several tasks our society is facing. I guess you know those tasks, you share them, so ecology, energy saving, demographic and social changes, the evolution of the use of those buildings, etc. And the idea, as I told you before, is to experiment or test innovative tools and process to transform those buildings, and of course to develop expertise in architecture schools. That's why we mobilize, of course, the professors and researchers, but also the PhD students in the teams. All those, those main purposes are, of course, undergoing but the main target is to preserve the architectural qualities, coherence and expression of those buildings in terms of aesthetic, local identity, technical innovation, breakthrough, spatial devices, etc. So, in other words, this program is set to save our 20th century heritage, and at the same time, so in a dynamic way, to bring smart solutions to improve our living environment in a sustainable way. So this research program is based on a comprehensive method, including research, teaching and partnership through professional actors and inhabitants, as was asked by the National Strategy for Architecture. So now, it's a bit small, I'm sorry, but I would just give you some samples of the topics those research teams are dealing with. Those pages are coming from a brochure we just realized, and we can send it, of course, if you are interested. So, for example, one team is dealing with the First World War, post-First World War reconstruction heritage in Normandy area, and in small or medium-sized towns. And this team is mainly dealing with actors, local actors, to after the diagnosis, of course, of those buildings. So mainly to find action strategies to transform these buildings in accordance to the values the team recognized in this heritage. Another example, famous, you probably know, is Firminy, a town that was built for a population growth in the 60s, 70s due to the growth of industrial activities in this region near Lyon and Saint-Étienne. And Firminy has some buildings designed by Le Corbusier, is protected by the UNESCO, but the UNESCO protection is not dealing with ordinary buildings in this city, and so this team is now investigating the possibility to transform the buildings and the ordinary buildings of Firminy, and especially its open spaces that contains high landscape value regarding some problematics like vacancy, the growth of vacancy and poverty in this city. Another example, a team that called his project Smart French. This team is making a huge database about 60s and 70s collective housings, public or private ones, in France. And through this database, making a study of the different typologies and the recognition of the smart spatial devices regarding light and climate in the project when the buildings were designed, and how to transform those heritage, integrating the original smart spatial devices. Another team is dealing with just a facade of a private housing complex in Lyon. This facade was designed by the engineer Jean Prouvé, and has now is now in bad conditions and has a lot of problem with about energy saving. So they are dealing with prototypes to find how to renovate this facade, but keeping, of course, the architectural expression of Jean Prouvé's design. And this team is dealing with the association of the inhabitants, which are very concerned and attached to this architecture of their residential building. Another team which is directed by Yann Nusson, who is here today, is dealing more specifically with individual housings in small or medium-sized towns. So I will not develop, maybe he will, if he wants. Another example is a team who is working in Guadeloupe on the including the risks, the seismic risks in the colonial architecture. So how to transform this building, integrate the risks without just obeying to the rules and the regulations, but keeping advantage of the quality of these buildings. And I think this is the last one. Another team who is dealing with health equipments, huge health equipments in Paris, which usage will change, and so it's also the same problematic, how to transform the usage of these buildings, respecting its architectural qualities and values, and integrating the new requests about energy or whatever. So you can see that the objects those teams are dealing with are various, not only housings, but also cultural or health equipments, facilities, and individual housings as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Corinne.